Some people don't enter your life slowly. They arrive like a storm. Suddenly your phone never stops buzzing. Suddenly someone is calling you special before they truly know you. Suddenly you feel seen, chosen, understood in a way that feels almost unreal. And for a while, it feels beautiful, like life finally decided to reward you after years of disappointment. They text you constantly, compliment you constantly, make you feel like the center of their universe. You start thinking, maybe this is what real love feels like. But real love usually grows like a fire. Love bombing explodes like fireworks, fast, intense, blinding. And that's why so many people fall into it, because human beings are emotionally starving. Most people walk through life carrying invisible loneliness. They want connection, safety, validation, someone who finally says, "You matter." Manipulators understand this better than most people understand themselves. That's what makes love bombing so dangerous. It doesn't begin with pain, it begins with pleasure. Nobody would stay if manipulation started with cruelty, so manipulators start with emotional paradise. They create a fantasy powerful enough to bypass your logic completely. And once you become emotionally attached to the fantasy, the trap closes. The terrifying part is that victims usually don't realize it's happening until the relationship starts destroying them. By then, they're already emotionally hooked, already confused, already chasing the version of the person they met in the beginning. Because that perfect version, it was never fully real. Love bombing is not just excessive affection, it's psychological conditioning. It's the art of making someone emotionally dependent before they can clearly see who you truly are. And once you understand how it works, you start realizing why some relationships leave people feeling addicted, confused, anxious, and emotionally broken long after they end. Because some people don't just want your love, they want control over your mind. Love bombers rarely build connections slowly. They create intensity immediately. The conversations become deep too fast. The compliments become personal too fast. The emotional attachment forms before trust has actually been earned. And the scariest part? It feels magical while it's happening. They say things nobody else has ever said to you. They make you feel unique, rare, irreplaceable. They speak as if meeting you changed their entire life overnight. You're different from everyone else. I've never felt this way before. I feel like I've known you forever. At first, your heart melts because everyone wants to feel deeply chosen by someone. But genuine intimacy takes time. Real emotional connection grows through consistency, experience, trust, conflict, patience, and honesty. Manipulators skip all of that. They create artificial closeness through emotional overload. And when emotions move too fast, your brain struggles to evaluate reality clearly. Logic becomes weaker, boundaries become softer, red flags become easier to ignore. That's why people trapped in love bombing often defend the manipulator early on. He's just passionate, she's just affectionate, they just love deeply. But healthy love respects pacing. Manipulation rushes it. A love bomber wants emotional access before you can fully observe them. They know that once you become emotionally attached, you're far more likely to tolerate behavior you normally wouldn't accept. That's why the beginning often feels almost cinematic. Constant attention, late-night conversations, big emotional confessions, overwhelming chemistry. Everything feels intense because intensity is the strategy. And many victims mistake intensity for compatibility. But intensity alone proves nothing. A wildfire is intense too. That doesn't mean it's safe to stand inside it.
Manipulators are often excellent observers, not because they care deeply, but because information gives them power. Love bombers pay attention to what you're missing emotionally. They listen carefully to your wounds, insecurities, loneliness, fears, and unmet needs. Then they become the exact solution to those emotional gaps. If you grew up feeling unseen, they make you feel adored. If you fear abandonment, they promise permanence. If you struggle with self-worth, they flood you with validation. At first, this feels healing, like someone finally understands you completely. But what's really happening is emotional customization. A manipulator doesn't always create a fake personality from nothing. They build one around your desires. They mirror your values, interests, dreams, humor, even your pain. That's why victims often say things like, "It felt like we were soulmates. It felt too perfect. It felt like they understood me better than anyone." Because for a while, the manipulator studies you so carefully that they become a reflection of what you desperately wanted to find. And this creates a powerful psychological bond, not just romantic attachment, emotional dependency. Because once someone becomes your primary source of validation, attention, affection, and emotional comfort, losing them starts feeling terrifying. That fear becomes control. This is why love bombing can feel almost addictive. The highs are extremely high, the affection feels overwhelming. Your nervous system starts associating that person with emotional reward. And slowly, without realizing it, your emotional stability becomes tied to their attention. That's the trap. Not love, dependency disguised as love. And the saddest part is this. Many victims confuse being emotionally overwhelmed by being emotionally valued. But someone flooding you with affection does not automatically mean they genuinely care about you. Sometimes it simply means they're trying to secure influence over you before their real behavior appears. This is where the confusion begins. In the beginning, you felt adored constantly. Every message felt exciting. Every interaction felt emotionally charged. You felt important to them every single day. Then suddenly, something changes. The energy shifts. The person who once couldn't stop texting now disappears for hours or days. The affection becomes unpredictable. The warmth turns cold without explanation. And this emotional inconsistency is not random, it's psychological conditioning. Because humans become obsessed with unpredictable rewards. When affection becomes unstable, your brain starts chasing the high of getting that loving version of the person back again. That's why victims often become more emotionally attached after the relationship starts hurting them. They aren't chasing the current reality, they're chasing the memory of the beginning. And manipulators know this. They create emotional contrast intentionally, extreme affection followed by distance, warmth followed by withdrawal, praise followed by criticism. This emotional instability keeps the victim psychologically focused on regaining approval. Suddenly, you're analyzing every text, every tone change, every delayed response, every tiny emotional shift. You start asking yourself, what did I do wrong? How do I fix this? How do I get them back to how they were before? That's the moment emotional control deepens, because now the relationship revolves around earning emotional security instead of naturally receiving it. And the manipulator gains enormous power from this imbalance. A healthy relationship does not constantly leave you emotionally starving. Real love feels stable. Manipulation feels addictive. There's a huge difference. Addiction creates obsession, anxiety, emotional dependency, and fear of losing access. Healthy love creates peace. But people raised around emotional inconsistency often mistake chaos for passion. If someone grew up around unstable affection, unpredictable love can feel strangely familiar. And familiarity is powerful, even when it hurts. That's why some people repeatedly fall into manipulative relationships without understanding why. The nervous system becomes attracted to emotional patterns it learned long ago, even destructive ones.
One of the darkest things about love bombing is how quickly affection becomes a weapon. At first, the manipulator gives love freely, constantly, intensely. Then, slowly, they begin attaching conditions to it. Now, affection depends on your behavior, your obedience, your emotional reactions, your willingness to tolerate disrespect. And because the victim remembers how amazing the beginning felt, they keep trying harder to fix the relationship. They become more patient, more forgiving, more understanding. Meanwhile, the manipulator slowly pushes boundaries further and further. Maybe they become controlling, jealous, dismissive, cruel during arguments. But every time the victim starts pulling away, the manipulator temporarily brings back the loving version from the beginning. And that moment creates hope again. That hope becomes the prison, because victims start believing they're still in there somewhere. They can become that person again. I just need to love them better. But the painful truth is this: the beginning was often a strategy, not a stable reality. The manipulator showed you an idealized version designed to emotionally hook you. Once attachment formed, maintaining the performance became less necessary. And this is why so many victims stay far longer than they should. Not because they're weak, because they're emotionally attached to a fantasy that once felt real. Manipulators understand human hope deeply. They know intermittent kindness keeps people trapped longer than constant cruelty. Tiny moments of affection become emotional fuel that keeps the victim emotionally invested. It's the same reason gamblers keep pulling slot machine levers after losses. Unpredictable rewards create powerful psychological attachment, and slowly the victim loses themselves trying to recover the love that originally trapped them. That's the tragedy of love bombing. The very thing that made you feel special eventually becomes the thing controlling you. Eventually, the relationship stops feeling safe, but by now, leaving feels emotionally terrifying because the manipulator has spent so much time shaping your emotional world that your confidence begins collapsing. You start doubting your instincts, your memory, your perception. When you express pain, they minimize it. You're too sensitive, you're imagining things, you're overreaction. And slowly, confusion replaces clarity. This is where many victims lose themselves completely, not because they're intelligent, but because prolonged emotional manipulation creates psychological exhaustion. Constant emotional highs and lows drain the nervous system. The victim becomes too emotionally overwhelmed to think clearly anymore. And manipulators benefit from that exhaustion because confused people are easier to control. You'll notice something disturbing too. The victim often becomes more focused on keeping the manipulator happy than understanding their own emotions. They walk on eggshells, monitor their words carefully, suppress their feelings to avoid conflict, and eventually they stop recognizing themselves. That's when the relationship becomes psychologically dangerous, because real love expands your sense of self. Manipulation erodes it. Healthy relationships make you feel more emotionally secure over time. Love-bombing relationships usually create increasing anxiety, instability, and emotional dependency. And the victim keeps hoping things will return to the beginning. But the beginning was never sustainable. It was bait. That realization destroys many people emotionally because it forces them to grieve not only the relationship, but the fantasy they believed was real.
And grieving a fantasy is incredibly painful because part of you keeps wondering if maybe the beautiful version of them truly existed somewhere underneath everything else. But sometimes people don't show you their real self at the beginning. They show you the version most likely to gain access to your heart.
Love bombing doesn't destroy people immediately. That's what makes it so dangerous. It begins with emotional euphoria, attention, affection, validation. The victim feels chosen, adored, emotionally alive. And slowly, almost invisibly, that intense affection transforms into control. That's why so many people don't recognize manipulation until they're already emotionally trapped inside it. Because nobody warns you that toxic relationships can feel magical in the beginning. Nobody warns you that manipulation sometimes arrives wrapped in compliments, passion, romance, and emotional intensity. But real love was never supposed to make you lose yourself. Real love doesn't force you to constantly chase reassurance. It doesn't leave you terrified of emotional withdrawal. It doesn't make you question your sanity every time you express pain. Healthy love feels safe enough for honesty. Manipulation feels dangerous to question. And one of the most important lessons you can learn in life is this: anyone can make you feel special temporarily, but very few people can make you feel emotionally safe consistently. That difference changes everything. So pay attention to pacing. Pay attention to consistency. Pay attention to how your nervous system feels after the excitement fades. Because people who truly love you won't need to overwhelm you to keep you attached. They won't rush intimacy. They won't use affection as leverage. They won't make you earn basic emotional security. Real love grows slowly enough for truth to remain visible. Manipulation moves fast because speed hides reality. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from the kind of love that slowly asks you to abandon yourself in order to keep it.